There's two of them right here. Feel free. No, it is. I'm not buying it. Sorry. I've been doing this too long.
You're great. I do have you streaming now, so if you get some extra people,
Okay.
send them over.
We're at A143. Gotcha.
Thank you.
Okie dokie. Thank you, Gary. Front row, they're also streaming around the corner. I hear my problem group is giving you a hard time. Where are y'all from? Claire?
Yes, ma'am. From Kingston.
Kingston? Okay.
And
Medill. Okay. Got it. There's my places to check off. They're also streaming around the corner in 143, and there's a seat up here in the front if you're okay with the front row. Oh, we've got 2 minutes. Is Tammy running around here today too? Okay. I figure I'll catch up with her at some point. You've seen her? Well, that's good. And then on our 1 o'clock session, we're hitting the simple view of reading very heavily. So just trying to understand, just trying to think, what can I get across in 50 minutes? Figured simple view would be the best. So if one of you happen to be there, give me some input. Okay. Because I'm trying to figure out how I can make that stronger. So I had Mary look at it. Yeah, gave me some stuff, but okay, 1 more minute. I think we're about as full as we're going to get. And we're going to be warm today, it looks like. So we're going to go ahead and get started. My name is Melissa Algram. I'm the Director of Reading Sufficiency. I got to make sure I don't have my back to you guys. Just a little bit about me. This will be my first year at the department. Next week will be my 1-year anniversary. So there's actually, not to call you out, but there is a seat up here. You're fine. We just started talking. You're good. I have been at the department for this last year. 6 years before that, I was an ELA elementary coordinator in Putnam City Schools. And for 17 years before that, I was either a 2nd grade teacher, a 3rd grade teacher, a 4th grade teacher, a 5th grade teacher, a 2-3 split, a 4-5 split, or an instructional coach. So kind of moved around a little bit. But we're talking today about reading sufficiency and things that we need to know. So if you're in the wrong place, this is your chance to sneak out. And as I got to turn the clicker on. All righty. So if you ever need to get a hold of me, there's my contact information, email, phone. Also, if you're not aware, on Facebook, we do have some literacy pages that are just helpful to be a part of. These are run by teachers, not by anyone at the State Department. ELA OK deals with K-12 literacy. ELA OK Elementary is trying to get a little bit more focus on elementary grades. And then the OK Early Ed, we just started this last year, is dealing more with pre-K, kinder issues. Okay? These are just really great places to go on and say, hey, I need help understanding this, or I'm going to be new to 4th grade this year. I need some great ideas for teaching this particular objective, or some read-alouds that 4th graders might like, because I've been in kindergarten the last 3 years. So it's just kind of a nice way to kind of network across the state when you can't really physically get together. So our goals for this session will be to talk about the different requirements that we have for K-3 under reading sufficiency. We're going to spend some time talking about the 4 different pathways to promotion and what documentation we have to maintain and any ongoing requirements. So let's talk a little bit about the purpose for RSA. RSA gets called the third grade retention law a lot because that's what is very public, it's very highly emotional, and it is a part of, a lot of the details are spelled out in this legislation. But the purpose for RSA is really to identify and intervene at our lowest grades before students get to third grade. This is really more of a K-2 law than a third grade law. So if we're starting this in third grade, we've got problems because they're not going to make that kind of growth in just a few months. So the purpose of RSA is really to identify students who are struggling with reading and make sure that they get those reading skills so that by the time they leave third grade, they are ready to keep going forward. We have a lot of research behind us that knows that when we have students that leave third grade without basic foundational reading skills, that their chances for dropping out increase exponentially. Their chances of becoming a drug abuser, of imprisonment, living in poverty, and dying in early death. This has a huge effect on kids with what we're doing with our 5, 6, 7, and 8-year-olds. And so we really need to be cognizant of that fact. So anytime we talk about data, there's always faces behind that, and it's important to remember those faces. So these are a couple of faces that are important to me that give some stories about RSA. Rebecca is getting ready to go into 5th grade. She is that kind of kid that you just love to be around because she has a lot of fun, she talks a lot, but she struggles with school and she doesn't love it. She's one that we've had to fight with to get interventions because she was so likable. We kept thinking she just needs time to grow up. And there is not a magic button that says we are suddenly grown up enough. So we had to really fight to get the interventions because she was on a quick path to failure if we did not get some help for her quickly. And we were able to do that because we knew the questions to ask. But it's important to remember that just because a kiddo is likable doesn't mean that they're going to grow up. Or boys that are very active, because tell you what, that's my tomboy right there that likes to be really, really active. And she'll settle down. No, she's never going to settle down. It's the way she is. She's just like her dad. He's 53. He hasn't matured yet either. So, but Olivia is going into 3rd grade. And she's kind of that student that just really is on top of everything until you say the word test. And then we have tears and tummy aches because she's worried about it, regardless. So one of the things to think about, too, is when we're talking about RSA, how do we talk to our kids about it? How do we talk to our parents? Because the parents go home and they get worried and say, you better pass that test or you're not going to 4th grade. And that's not exactly true because we have other options. And so we need to make sure that we are using that language with parents and with our kids so that their anxiety level doesn't go through the roof. Okay? So I always want to preface that if our intention is really to say, what are the needs and how do we fill those needs in rather than just do we retain if they fail on a single day, because that's not what this law is about. So there is a web page on the State Department website at sde.ok.gov, and then it's reading sufficiency. We do try to keep that up. We're trying to update some documents as we keep going. I've found that it is easier to create things than to get them approved and online. So we're still continuing to work on that. But there are some different supports that I'll reference throughout this next hour that can be found on this website, usually on the coordinator page. And one other thing to be aware of, there is also a page here for parents. If you're trying to figure out how you can help parents get involved with some things, there's a lot of links of ready-made, print-friendly, ready-to-print activities for you to give to your parents, both in English and in Spanish. So if you're needing help for them to do that, that's a page you might want to spend a little time exploring. So let's start with talking about kindergarten through 3rd grade. Anytime we start with something, we need to make a plan if we're going to be effective at that. And every school has to have a reading plan. And the reading plan is really to design the structure of our instructional block for ELA. What should that look like? That gets updated every year, annually. We have about 984 elementary schools that serve K through 3 in Oklahoma, and we read all 984 reading plans. So just understand that we are actually looking at that, and we do actually read every single one of those. So within that structure, we're talking about Tier 1, 2, and 3. So if you're familiar with multi-tiered systems of support, MTSS, RTI, yes, no? Okay, so you should recognize this triangle. So really, RSA is talking about using that MTSS structure in those lowest grades. So we start off with a core program for Tier 1, and that is required by statute to be an uninterrupted 90-minute block at minimum. This is when we address reading instruction on grade level for all of our students. Whether they're high, whether they're low, whether they're EL, special ed, gifted, this is when all of our students are meeting grade level objectives. They might be scaffolded. If I have a third grader that's still struggling with basic reading skills, they may be listening to a lot of things, but they still need to have some exposure to the expectations of a third grader. We must use a research-based program during this time. So OERs can be a little bit of an issue since they don't necessarily meet that research base. So those are great for supplementing, not just necessarily for our core. And if you are filling out the reading plan, you'll notice that on the drop down, the options have been updated to what's currently been approved by our textbook committee for the state. So sometimes we have students that their needs are not being met through Tier 1 and they need a little additional. So we have Tier 2 that are receiving interventions as well as Tier 3. It's important to remember that interventions are in addition to, not in place of, our reading block. Okay, they need that extra for a reason. At one point, statute required that we had at least 30 minutes a day for Tier 2 interventions. That statute has been shifted to say meeting the needs of students. So you need to consider what the needs of those students are. So if you have a kindergartner that's struggling with letter names, letter sounds, repeated practice of 10 minutes, a couple of times a day of letter names, letter sounds is going to be helpful for that child, where 30 minutes uninterrupted for a 5-year-old is probably not. But as you start moving closer to connected text, best practice would still be closer to that 30 minute on a daily basis rather than 30 minutes twice a week, 10 minutes twice a week. When I'm talking about a third grader struggling, with working on reading, they don't have time to do any of that. So as far as statute is, it says based on the needs of the student for Tier 2. Tier 3, we are required to provide 45 to 60 minutes in addition. Now think about it this way. Tier 2 students are usually about 6 months behind their peers. So think about a third grader who might be struggling with long vowel patterns or vowel variants. The third grader who's still struggling with CAT spells cat is it's much more than 6 months behind their peers. They need additional time. They are in crisis mode at this point. Interventionists can be a variety of people. It could be the classroom teacher. It could be the classroom teacher across the hall. So if Sandy and I each have second grade classrooms, and I take the high second graders, and I can take more of them and do some good rich vocabulary activities or some things like that, and Sandy's taking our lower students and maybe providing some intervention time. That's one way to handle that if we don't have a lot of extra support staff. Some schools do have interventionists that they have hired, or reading specialists that can work with students. EL teachers, when they're working with students learning and acquiring English as a second language, is also addressing language skills. Speech language pathologists, when they're working on language. Now, articulation, no. But language, yes, those are interventions that are affecting our reading skills. Special education. Now, we have a lot of times people that think Tier 3 is special education. It is not. But we could have a student that is in Tier 3 because of lack of instruction. They've been in 15 different schools in 3 years. There's a lot of hopping around. We're going to have gaps. It might be the student that shows up at 10 o'clock every morning and needs to take a nap in the afternoon because they've been up all night. We all can put faces to those situations. Or the student that misses every Monday and every Friday. They have a lack of instruction going on there. So we might have gaps without a learning disability, but that doesn't mean that we ignore the gaps. We still have to address those. But sometimes that special education teacher can help out if they have 2 students on their caseload working on a skill, and that non-special ed kiddo comes in. I'm going to pull them in with that for the instruction. They need the same thing. There's not a magic wand for special ed. We still have to address those. So all schools must give a screener to all students K through 3. And the screener solves one or answers one question. Are they at risk? Are they not at risk? So these students that are at risk, I might need to delve a little deeper to figure out what's going on. So statute says that we give this at the beginning and end of each school year in K through 3. Best practice would be 3 to 4 times a year. I need something in the middle to know what's going on as well, especially to catch kids that move around. We have a very mobile society. One of my jobs as an instructional coach was to grab students on either their second, third, or fourth day, not their first, but their second, third, or fourth day, and run them through a screener just to see what was going on. There are currently 15 screeners approved by the State Board of Education that we can use through next year. Beginning in the 1920 school year, the State Board met on June 28th and approved a list. We noticed that we had 5 very specific criteria that we wanted all of those to meet, as far as like being actually a screener, having good reliability, validity. If you want to know more about that process, we are doing a webinar on July 26th, I believe at 3 o'clock. And it will also be, the recording of that will also be posted on the RSA page. But as we start moving towards the 1920 school year, what we're working on at the department is meeting with each of these vendors to get more information about them, to get some quick guide pages out for districts to be able to use as they're making selections and have time for training in the spring.
I have a quick question on that.
Sure.
If you're already using Dibbles Next
Okay.
without the in-class part of it.
Okay, it's two different vendors. So Dibbles Next is Voyager, and M-Class is with Amplify.
So your Voyager is not going to work.
So based on the information that they provided for the study, they said they did not meet that criteria where M-Class did. So we have had a couple of vendors say, well, we need to submit some more information, and so we're having those conversations with them. But as of right now, this is what the board has approved based on that criteria and what the vendors submitted. Okay?
Are you familiar with both the Dibble Next and what's the difference between them?
Somewhat. I did not. I worked with the study. We had researchers, outside researchers that were coming in and delving into it deeper. And so that is one of the things we are going to try to address in that webinar, because that's a question that comes up frequently. Okay? Okay, so when we have a screener and we have students that are labeled as at risk, any student who is found as at risk should have a program of reading instruction that basically outlines what are we going to do to fill in the gaps for this student. So statute requires that that program of reading instruction aligns with the Oklahoma academic standards. It may include, but is not limited to, additional instructional time. We know we need time. Those kids need time to learn things. It could be in school, it could be tutorial after school, during school, on Saturdays, during the summer, and it's likely that we will need to use some kind of assessments for diagnosing what the exact issue is and monitoring our progress so that we know what's working. If you need samples of what the academic progress plans look like, these are also on the state website page. There's a different one for first and second than there is for third, because there's slightly different requirements in statute. But that does meet everything that's currently there. So when we have kindergartners come in that are at risk, we all know we have those kindergartners that come in and have never held a pencil, never held scissors, don't know what any of those marks on those pages mean. So what statute requires us to do is really emphasize those reading skills, because the kindergarten standards really do hit a lot of those. Now what we'll see a lot of times is kindergartners come in and we start teaching them. We see out of 10 that are at risk, about 8 of them start taking off, and we have 2 that are still down here. So now I've pinpointed my 2 that really do need some more specific intervention. We don't just give them more time to keep growing, because we never know when. But the standards for having that those skills, those benchmarks, at the beginning of kindergarten are usually fairly low. So we need them to be able to come in with something. And if they're not coming in with something, they're already behind somewhat. So we need to make sure we're addressing that. So teachers are really monitoring the progress, especially if we have a lot of kiddos that are coming in and they're just needing to work on letter names and letter sounds and all those fun things just to get started. As we monitor that progress, we can quickly find out who's making good progress with regular instruction and who is going to need more. And then obviously we will measure that year-end reading progress. We want to know where they went to. In first and second grade, we start to become more targeted, really focusing in on who needs that more individualized plan. And that's when we start seeing a student reading proficiency team show up to start making that plan. So the SRPT is the parent or guardian of the student, the current teacher for reading, and then the teacher in the next grade level. If the district has a certified reading specialist, we want to utilize them. But if not, you don't need to go hire someone just for this. So this might, in reality, usually works this way. As a first grade teacher, I have Joey over here who has some issues. And so we start figuring out what exactly our plan is going to look like. We write out our plan. I go to the second grade teacher across the hall and say, let's talk about our plans. Would you help me make sure that this is going where we need it to go? She signs off of it, and then we have our conference with the parent. Because I have a lot of people that think, well, I can't go to all my conferences and the conferences for the grade level below me. It doesn't work that way. So we have those conversations. The point with this is, are we speaking vertically? Are we keeping our mind on that this is a vertical process, and do we keep having those conversations? Third grade is the same expectations. We still have a student reading proficiency team developing that plan. But we also know that if they are still at risk for reading in third grade, we're on a really tight deadline. And so we really need to focus in on that specialized tutoring if that's available, or making sure that those interventions are well in place. If you are lucky enough to fill out RSA reports on single sign-on, there are 4 of them that we currently have. There's the annual district reading plan, which we just kind of went over. It is due August 31st, so I can start doing some fun reading. We also have the beginning of year report that basically just says we tested this many students and this many students showed up as at risk. Those 2 reports is what we base our funding off of. And so we cannot distribute any funding until both of those reports are done for every single site in the state of Oklahoma. Okay, so you all know how we have those 1 or 2 students in our classrooms that don't turn in their stuff. Okay, we also have that as adults sometimes too. So I start calling, would you please do your report? Please do your report. Do your report. Come on, get your report done. You're waiting up for the whole state. So please don't be one of those phone calls. Just try to get those reports done. The third grade promotion and retention report basically just lets us know of those students who did not meet RSA criteria last year, what did we do with them? Where did they all go? And then the end of year report just gives us a way of measuring growth across the state. There did used to be a report for Summer Reading Academy. It does not exist any longer. Okay, so I've had a lot of calls on that here lately trying to find the Summer Reading Academy report. You do not need to do one. Okay, it's nice to take something off our plates once in a while. So as I said, we do get funding for RSA, and it does require that all districts in the state have the reading plan and the beginning of year report certified before we can do any disbursement. What happens is the legislature gives us one line item. They say, here's a pot of money, go and divide it out. And so when we get that beginning of year report and all those numbers, we say we have this amount of money, we have this amount of students that have showed up at risk across the state, and we divide one into the other and come up with a per student funding. Last year it was around $85 and some cents. And so when your district comes back and says, I have 10 students that are at risk, then you get $850 and some odd cents to be able to spend for K-3 reading. Now there is a PDF on the RSA page that states what we can spend that money for and the OCAS codes that go with that. Anything that helps our K-3 students with reading is really what's allowable. So PD for teachers for reading, books for your classroom, interventions, all things that are great. A rug for your classroom for kids to sit on, please find another funding source. That rug is not going to help your kids become better readers. So we want to be intentional how we spend that money. At one point, a couple of years ago, we did have, it was a use it how you need that. So I still am getting questions, can I use this to pay the light bill? Well, while we do need to have light to see the words on the page, that's not going to help our kids with reading. So we really need that RSA funding to be spent on things that will help our students become better readers. Any questions on any of this so far before we move to the next session? So this is probably a shorter part of our presentation, but this takes up a lot of our time. There's a lot of intentionality that goes with this. So then we come to third grade, and we have a lot of details there to talk about. So we have 4 different pathways that students can be promoted to 4th grade. One is that they can meet RSA criteria on the 3rd grade state reading test. They can show proficiency on one of the screeners, meet one of 7 good cause exemptions, or there can be a unanimous decision to promote with the student reading proficiency team. Now, what statute says about retention is that any student who does not meet criteria on the 3rd grade test, doesn't meet an exemption, doesn't qualify for the probationary promotion, should be retained in 3rd grade and provided intensive instructional services and supports. We can't just send the kid back to 3rd grade and say, good luck. There's a reason that we have decided that we needed to retain this child. And there's some gaps in their learning for whatever reason. And we have a responsibility to address those gaps. So when we retain a student, we need to retain that student with a plan for additional supports. And what will those look like? And when we talk to the parent and say, we think your child needs to go back to 3rd grade, and here's what we're going to do to help them be successful. Because a lot of times what happens is we send that student back to 3rd grade and we get that beginning of year test, and they tend to benchmark just above that level. And then, because they're a year above their peers, and that makes sense that they would do that. But then we start seeing this happen, and they start going downhill. And so without those supports in place very quickly happening, that student's not going to be successful. They're going to be right back where they started from as far as failing compared to their peers. And they're just going to be a year older when they do it. So we have to have those instructional services and supports if we retain a student. So some key points to remember with RSA decisions is that we have the pathways in order to allow for the best decision for each individual student. It is not, if you don't pass the test, you don't go to 4th grade. That is not the case. There's a lot of different options that we're going to talk to. Not passing the test starts the conversation. Promotion decisions are not based on multiple criteria, or are based on multiple criteria, not on a single test score. We have a ton of data on each one of our kiddos in an elementary school. We collect a lot of data, and we need to consider all of that data when we're making any kind of decision about their educational future. So pathway 1, meeting RSA criteria. All 3rd grade students get 2 scores from the OSTP. They get the overall performance, the below basic, basic, proficient, and advanced, and then they get an RSA criteria, which is either a meets or does not meet. And the 2 do not line up. Okay? And here's why. One is this is taking 100% of the test. This is taking about 70% of the test. They are only looking at Standard 2 and Standard 4. So they are not looking at the questions dealing with grammar, with research, or with critical analysis of text, Standard 3. So this is about 70% and 100%. We have 2 different data sets. The other thing is the goal, when we say a student is proficient overall, we're saying that they're on the path for college and career readiness. When we're saying a student meets RSA criteria, we're saying they have mastered foundational skills. So we have 2 different goals. So we have 2 different data sets and 2 different goals with RSA. So when we're talking about promotion and retention decisions, we have the conversation around this score, not this score. Now I have had some districts ask, well, we had this student that met criteria, but we really think they need to be retained anyway. That's fine. That's a decision you can make, but it is a district decision under district policy, not under state law. Okay? So that means that whatever the policy is at any other grade level, that's what you would follow in that situation. Okay? I can answer any questions about RSA, but if it's talking about the test itself, Christy McCreary is our language arts assessment specialist. She does an amazing job of explaining things where even I can understand them. So this is the person that you would want to contact if you had any questions about the OSTP. So let's talk a little bit about our screener and how we can show proficiency that way. So we can score at the end of 3rd grade proficiency on any of those screeners that have been adopted, And the publishers have identified their proficiency level. Now, they didn't just throw a dart and figure out the number. They have years and years of research behind that that says this is where end of third grade proficiency is. And there is a page on the State Department website that shows for each of those screeners what that proficiency level is, because they all measure it some ways. Some are doing it by percentiles, some are by scaled score. Honestly, I have to look at it every time somebody asks me because I can't keep all 15 of them straight. So, with statute, it says that any first, second, or third grade student who shows that end of third grade proficiency is exempt from retention. And yes, that does include first and third. It depends on the measure. Some measures have a different set of materials for third graders than they do for second or first graders. And some measures have a continuum where you could meet that end of third grade benchmark because they keep going up as they're reading. So as long as it's end of third grade proficiency, then they're exempt from retention. This can be met at any time during that. It doesn't have to be just during the beginning and end of year assessment windows. So that student that came in October that I said I'd give a quick screen or two, if they meet that proficiency, then they're on my list that they are exempt from retention. They also don't have to be at that level during the testing window, because sometimes we'll have a student that meets that, and then you know how kids are in spring, they start backsliding a little bit. That's okay. They just have to have gotten to that point at least once, and then they're there. I have a lot of districts that use multiple screeners, like they might use both STAR and DIBELS. And so if STAR is what's on your reading plan, but the student meets it on DIBELS, that's fine. It's any approved screener. It doesn't have to be your official screener. Does that make sense? Okay. Any questions on either of those first two pathways? All right, you guys are a quiet bunch today. So we have the third pathway, which have 7 good cause exemptions. On the Attendee Hub app that you have, there's this PowerPoint, but there's also 3 different one-page PDFs. One of those is spelling each of these out in better detail, okay? Because I didn't think we needed to read the whole slide to you, but sometimes if you're wanting to look at all of the details, it's right there. It's also a one-page product that you can print out and either give to your teachers or keep in your binder as you're having to deal with RSA so that you have it to refer back to. So these have not changed in the last couple of years, which is kind of nice that we actually have something that didn't change about RSA for a little while. We have the first exemption, which is limited English proficient who have had less than 2 years of instruction in an English program. Then we have our students who take the OAP. These are our severely disabled students. It would be written into their IEP that they take the OAP. Okay. Students who demonstrate an acceptable level of performance in an alternative standardized reading assessment. We currently have 4 standardized reading assessments that are approved by the State Board of Education. There's 2 different forms of the ITBS. There's the SAT-10 and the Terra Nova. And they don't have to take the whole thing. It's the reading comprehension portion of that. And they need to be at the 45th percentile in order to meet that exemption. There's there is a page on the department website that spells all of that out for your reference later on. It just says alternative assessments, K3. So exemption 4 is demonstrating through a teacher-developed portfolio that they can read on grade level. Again, there's a cover page on the website that shows exactly what that would look like. And then exemption 5 are for students who have an IEP in the area of reading and they've been previously retained 1 year. Now, I will say that the bill that Governor Fallin vetoed this last spring would have changed that exemption to remove the 1 year and would have just said any student making progress on their IEP goals would have been exempt. The bill that was vetoed this last spring would have changed this to remove the 1 year retention and would have just said that students on an IEP making progress towards their goals would have been exempt. Now, that bill was vetoed, so that is not in play at this point. However, I do know that the intention is to send that bill back to the legislature this fall or this next session. Okay, but it's something to kind of consider when we're looking at IEP students and whether we should retain them or not. Students who've been previously retained for a total of 2 years. Now, for both of these, being retained in pre-K does count as a year of retention, or being in a transitional grade. So like they went to kindergarten, then a transitional kindergarten, or transitional first, and then first grade. That transitional year was counted as a retention year. The last exemption is for students who have had an exceptional emergency. Now this is not just they got sick. One example that we had is a student who was in a horrific car accident with his family. One parent passed away, another parent was in ICU. This is not a child that we're going to add retention to their list, or because we know they're not going to be where they need to be. Your district testing coordinator would have access to any forms that are needed to apply for this exemption to the Office of Assessment. Okay? Questions on exemptions? Okay. So then we have our student reading proficiency team. Now all of the other pathways have had specific numbers attached to them. You either need to be at this level or this level or this level. This does not. What this one says is that students can get a probationary promotion through the SRPT by unanimous decision of this team that is then approved by the principal and the district superintendent. So the SRPT members would be the third grade teacher who taught reading, a fourth grade teacher responsible for reading instruction, and the parent or guardian, and then a reading specialist if available. This person right here is a really important member of the team. Not somebody to call afterwards and say, here's what we decided, but somebody who needs to be part of the conversation. Okay? So with this, for this to have an effect, the decision must be unanimous to promote. So if we have Melissa here is the third grade teacher, and Crystal is the fourth grade teacher, I'm the parent, and all of us sit around and we say, yes, we think that this student should be able to go to fourth grade. We're still going to provide those interventions. They can still be successful. All of us agree that student's promoted. But if I come in as the parent and Melissa says, as a third grade teacher, I do not think that this child can be successful in fourth grade. She feels, and I say, I disagree. I want them in fourth grade. I'm the parent. I should be able to overrule that. Not in this case. If it is not a unanimous decision, the student needs to be retained. There is not an appeals process, because that's the phone calls I'm getting all the time right now. What's the appeals process? There is not. Statute says if it is not a unanimous decision, the student is to be retained. Okay? When that committee meets, it's important to consider all of the data, not just the test score, not just the screener score, although those are 2 data points to include, but also the classroom data, any formative assessments, what's been the progress across time. If we've been providing interventions, hopefully we've been doing progress monitoring and some periodic monitoring. So what is that looking like? Are we seeing an upward trend that we want to continue? And we think we can continue. If they're on an IEP, what's the progress towards their goals? If they are an EL student, what's the progress on WIDA? Well, sometimes their attendance data can also be important to consider as well. When you have that student that has missed 60% of the year, or 30% of the year, or whatever, that saying, here's our justification, here's why. It's not that your child can't do it, they just haven't been here to be able to do that. Okay? So whenever we have any of these, we have some documentation that's required. So the short version is, any student who does not meet RSA criteria needs to have some kind of documentation saying what happened. We either retained or we met one of the other pathways. One of the other PDFs on your app goes over each one of those scenarios and exactly what documentation you really do need to have in their permanent record. Okay? It is also recommended that you keep that academic progress plan for those students, because for a lot of the exemptions, it says that the student needs to have at least 2 years of intervention. The APP in place is documentation that those 2 years of intervention has taken place. It's also helpful if that child moves to know what has been going on. Never fails that we'll have a third grade parent that comes in and the school says, no, we really think we need to retain. And they say, this is the first time anyone has said there's a problem. Yeah, we all know those. And then we pull out the plans that say, but look, we had a problem here, we had an issue here, and you've signed this to say this is what we recommended. So that gives you some backing up to say, not only here's what we need to do to continue for this child, but here's how we also make sure that we did what we were supposed to do as well. Okay, so those are just a good thing to hold on to. It doesn't have to be a big stack of work. It can just be a quick cover page. Here was what was happening. Okay, it's always a good, if the parent signs it, I keep it. It's just a good idea to have that documentation. So we do have some ongoing requirements as well. And again, this is that last PDF one-page document that you have for reference that just says in each case, what do we need to have? So for students who are retained, we do have a responsibility to make sure that they have a high-performing teacher and that they are getting intensive services and supports for their area of deficiency. They still need that 90-minute uninterrupted reading block as all other third graders would as well. So that's usually not an issue. And then any additional strategies prescribed by the district. And here's some ideas of things that are mentioned in statute that might be done. This is not a required list. You don't have to check all these off, but these are some things that might be considered for students that are being retained. In addition, students who have been retained must receive at least one of the following. Either kind of supplemental tutoring. This could include before, after, or during the school day. A parent-guided read-at-home plan, or a mentor or tutor with specialized reading training. If we're retaining a student and we have them on that plan and we say this is what you're going to do, we're usually meeting this first bullet point right there for providing additional instruction. Okay? I see a couple of pictures, so I'll wait before I click. Okay. So for students that are promoted through an exemption, so usually we're needing to give them an additional, sorry, my mouth is dry, I'm having a hard time talking. We need to continue providing them with interventions until they're able to show that proficiency. And they show proficiency through the screener, not by passing the 4th grade test. So it's using the screener for the end of 4th grade proficiency. So they still are going to need to be on a plan, good cause 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, or 7, okay, until they can show that proficiency. Now, we know good cause 2 is a whole other issue. They were exempt from that for a reason. They have severe and profound deficiencies. Their IEP will cover what they need to cover. Okay. For students promoted through the Student Reading Proficiency Team, they are also making sure that they are provided reading instruction. We don't just say, we don't feel like retaining kids, let's just move them on forward, but we're saying we're moving you forward and here's the supports we're going to provide for you to be successful. Okay, that's the important part of that sentence.
I have a question
Yeah.
with that. And I know no one wants more reports. Well, why do we not report our 4th graders? What is that from?
As far as those numbers, that is something that we are working on building, that the legislature did pass, that they wanted to start tracking students that do not meet criteria and what's going on with them through 8th grade. So that is that's a report being built.
That's a little bit of an issue.
Sure.
When you are requesting them the teachers to do that, but yet there is no teeth in it to say I have to report this.
Yep.
So that will be helpful.
Yes. So for those that might be in the streaming room, the question is, why don't we report 4th graders and start fully like we do the K through 3 students? And so that is a report that is starting to be built of after 3rd grade, we have to start being able to figure out where is that going to go. That will go in the wave. That's going to be a whole other issue. And once it's built, then we'll start talking about how this is going to work, okay? So it's a little bit more. Again, we continue to, for students that are promoted through committee, we need to continue to review their performance and decide if they need to continue to be promoted or retained each year until they are showing proficiency through that screening instrument. Or the way current statute reads is until the students transition to ACE. ACE no longer exists in the middle schools, which is again that law that was, or that bill that was vetoed, would have shifted that to the end of 5th grade. Okay, and then it moves to a locally designed plan. So for right now, it's thinking through elementary school, and then after elementary school, we shift to a locally designed plan. Okay?
Can I ask a question?
Sure thing.
So is there an app then for 4 and 5 to document what we're doing, or is that necessary, or?
Currently, I would use the third grade app, or the APP.
Yes.
I would use the one for third grade for documentation for yourselves, and just to kind of have that form. That's something that sounds like I'll look into a little bit more, so that's a good question on that. Okay.
And for those students that are promoted with a good cause, do they also get additional support?
Yes,
Okay.
until they are showing that they are proficient in where they need to be. Yes. Good cause and committee promotions. We keep doing something with them. So a couple of frequently asked questions. What if they move to, after taking the test? They took the test, and in May they move away. Or you have a student that shows up in May. The district that administered the test is the one that's going to get the scores back. They're the ones that in majority of the situations will have worked with the student the longest, and they're the ones that really need to make that decision. Okay? And then send those records on to the receiving district. What if they didn't take the test? If they were not enrolled in an Oklahoma public school, they were either in private school, homeschooled, out of state, then RSA does not apply for these students. You would promote based on district policy. If you have a student that shows up on your doorstep, it's whatever your district policy was for placing a student. If you place them if the parent says they're in 4th grade and you place them in 4th grade, then that's your policy that you're following. If you give a placement test for any student regardless of age, then you can do that for those students as well. You can't do something different, okay? Yeah, because and we're seeing more and more students that are doing this, that are going to private school for 3rd grade or homeschooled for 3rd grade, really just to avoid the repercussions. So I have had some districts say, we're going to re-examine our policies for when we have students that come back to see especially with homeschooled, if they're not in an accredited private school, what is going to be our placement, whether it's 1st grade, 3rd grade, 10th grade, what's going to be our placement policy. So if a student was enrolled in an Oklahoma public school, but they were absent during the testing window, either they were ill or the parent just said, I'm not going to send them to school because I don't want them to take the test, that's fine. But the student did not meet RSA criteria, so we would need to follow an alternate pathway. I've had a couple of questions that came up last week. What about I have a student that's enrolling that they were at an online charter school and they just didn't go to take the test? Same thing. They did not meet RSA criteria. They had that did not assess assigned to their name in measured progress, so they need to find another pathway for promotion at that point. Okay? So there's my contact information once again if you have any questions. Anything else that has come up that you just jogged your memory of, I really needed to ask that question for the good of the whole?
Will this presentation be on the website?
It isn't yet. It's on the attendee hub, but I am planning on doing this as a webcast and putting this on the website just for reference later on. So I did promise some people I would try to do that next week and get that going. Just
so summer school, if we do a 6-week summer program,
okay.
How does that count?
Okay, so if a child went...
I know that's extra.
Sure. During that summer program, if they were working on their portfolio and met the requirements of their portfolio, that'd be good cause exemption 4. Or let's say we gave them an alternative assessment at the end of summer school and they met that requirement, that'd be good cause exemption 3. Or we might have given them the screener during summer school to see if they could meet that end of 3rd grade proficiency. Time aspect. Summer school is great and it's fully recommended. Yes, but it's that thing. Okay? Gives us an opportunity. Thank you, Melissa. Good to see you.
I have a question about
Yes.
the plans for the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd grade. Is there not one for kindergarten? You mentioned it, but you didn't say.
I was going to
is there
say, yeah.
paperwork for
I just
kindergarten?
realized when I started talking on this last week, it's like, there needs to be one for kindergarten on there. So, yes.
So there is one on the web.
There should be, but I'll double check that. And if I think there is.
Okay.
Yeah, I think there is.
Okay.
There should be.
All right.
I will be. I'll here all day. Absolutely.
Thank you.
Sure.